Imagine waking up with a headache, and the doctor decides to drill a hole in your skull with a primitive tool. Or breaking your arm, and the specialist suggests amputating the entire limb to avoid complications. Sounds like a nightmare? Welcome to the medicine of the past, where the cure was often worse than the disease itself. Today, we'll dive into the most bizarre and terrifying treatments in medical history, discovering how our ancestors turned the art of healing into a true chamber of horrors. Get ready to learn about practices that will make you grateful to be living in the 21st century. For over 2,000 years, physicians firmly believed that most diseases were caused by an excess of bad blood in the body. The solution? Simple. Drain liters and liters of blood from patients until they became pale as ghosts. This macabre practice, known as bloodletting, was responsible for more deaths than many epidemics of the era. Medieval doctors used everything from leeches to cutting instruments called fleams to open veins and arteries. Most shocking is that the more serious the patient's condition, the more blood was extracted. Imagine the scene. A person already weakened by infection being literally drained to unconsciousness while the doctor proudly observed his scientific treatment. The most famous case of this medical barbarism was the death of George Washington, the first president of the United States. In December 1799, Washington developed a throat inflammation. His doctors, following the protocols of the time, removed approximately 40% of all his blood in less than 24 hours. The result? Washington died not from the infection, but from the massive blood loss ordered by his own physicians. The theory behind bloodletting was based on Hippocratic medicine of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. According to this completely misguided view, all diseases resulted from an imbalance between these bodily fluids. Since blood was considered the hot and moist humor, any fever or inflammation indicated blood excess that needed to be eliminated. But scientific reality shows us the opposite. When we lose blood, our immune system weakens drastically, blood pressure plummets, and vital organs lack adequate oxygenation. In other words, bloodletting transformed patients with real chances of recovery into victims doomed to die from hypovolemic shock. Imagine a world where doctors prescribed one of the most toxic elements known to humanity as a universal remedy. For centuries, Mercury was considered a miraculous panacea, capable of curing everything from syphilis to intestinal constipation. What doctors didn't know, or chose to ignore, is that they were literally poisoning their patients with a substance that causes irreversible neurological damage, kidney failure, and death by intoxication. Mercury treatments took truly frightening forms. Patients were forced to ingest liquid mercurial compounds, inhaled toxic vapors in fumigation chambers, or received direct injections of the heavy metal into their veins. For syphilis cases, considered the great threat of the era, doctors created a macabre saying, "One night with Venus, a lifetime with Mercury," referring to the long and agonizing mercurial treatments that lasted for years. The process of mercurial salivation was particularly horrifying. Doctors administered increasing doses of mercury until patients began to salivate uncontrollably, producing up to 3 liters of saliva per day. This excessive salivation was seen as a sign that the medicine was expelling disease from the body. In reality, it was clear evidence of severe mercury poisoning, which caused mouth ulcerations, tooth loss, violent tremors, and progressive dementia. A slight hint of mystery and suspense when telling the story. Documented historical cases reveal the extent of this medical tragedy. Abraham Lincoln, the 16th American president, suffered from chronic depression that many medical historians attribute to the blue pills he took regularly. Mercury-loaded medications prescribed for melancholy. Analysis of Lincoln's hair samples revealed mercury levels dozens of times above normal, possibly explaining his episodes of irritability and emotional instability. The hat industry of the 18th and 19th centuries created another tragic example of mercurial toxicity. Manufacturers used mercury nitrate to process rabbit and beaver fur, creating an occupational epidemic known as Mad Hatter's disease. Workers developed bizarre neurological symptoms, uncontrollable tremors, vivid hallucinations, drastic personality changes, and erratic behavior, inspiring Lewis Carroll's Mad Hatter character. We now reach the darkest chapter of modern medicine, lobotomy, a procedure that transformed thousands of functional people into human vegetables, all in the name of scientific progress. Between the 1930s and 1950s, doctors literally destroyed brain connections of patients using instruments similar to ice picks, believing they were curing mental illnesses. The procedure, developed by Portuguese neurologist Antonio Egas Moniz, consisted of inserting a sharp tool through the skull to cut connections between the frontal lobes and the rest of the brain. The promise was revolutionary. Eliminate undesirable behaviors like aggression, anxiety, or even homosexuality. Yes, sexual orientation was considered a mental illness subject to surgical correction. Walter Freeman, the American doctor who popularized the technique, developed the infamous ice pick lobotomy, an even more barbaric method that could be performed in ordinary medical offices. Freeman literally used household ice picks, inserting them through patients' eye sockets until reaching the brain. Without adequate anesthesia, without a sterile environment, and frequently without informed consent, he treated over 3,500 people, including children as young as 5 years old. The results were terrifying. Patients who previously maintained jobs, relationships, and independent lives became apathetic beings, incapable of feeling deep emotions or making complex decisions. Many developed incontinence, severe memory loss, and completely altered personalities. Rosemary Kennedy, sister of future President John F. Kennedy, exemplifies this tragedy. Subjected to a lobotomy at 23 to control her mood swings, she spent the rest of her life institutionalized, unable to care for herself. The medical community of the time enthusiastically embraced this brain mutilation. In 1949, Egas Moniz received the Nobel Prize in Medicine for the discovery of the therapeutic value of lobotomy, an award now considered one of the greatest shames in scientific history. Psychiatric hospitals performed mass lobotomies, transforming healing institutions into neurological destruction factories. Imagine a time when doctors prescribed radiation as if it were vitamin C, believing that X-rays and radioactive elements were miraculous elixirs of youth. During the first decades of the 20th century, radioactivity was seen as a mysterious and beneficial force, leading to the creation of treatments we now recognize as brutally lethal. The Radium Dial Company produced radioactive paints for luminous watches, employing mainly young women who painted the hands by licking brushes soaked in radium. Supervisors guaranteed that this practice was completely safe, claiming that radium was good for health. The result was an epidemic of jaw cancer, severe anemia, and death by radioactive poisoning. These women, known as radium girls, literally glowed in the dark due to radiation accumulated in their bodies. Doctors of the era prescribed radium water as a revitalizing tonic, promising cure for arthritis, sexual impotence, and even baldness. Patients paid fortunes for bottles of water contaminated with radioactive elements, believing they were consuming the most advanced medical treatment available. Eben Byers, an American industrialist, consumed more than 1,400 bottles of Radithor, commercial radioactive water, between 1927 and 1930. The result? His jaw literally disintegrated, his bones became brittle as glass, and he died in extreme agony from radium poisoning. Medical spas offered radioactive baths and radon inhalation treatments, promising rejuvenation and cure of chronic diseases. Patients spent hours in chambers saturated with radioactive gases, believing they were receiving revolutionary therapy. In reality, they were exposing themselves to radiation doses equivalent to multiple daily CT scans, developing cancers that would only manifest years later. The cosmetics industry also embraced radioactivity with dangerous enthusiasm. Facial creams containing radium promised luminous and youthful skin, while radioactive lipsticks supposedly gave women an irresistible natural glow. Thousands of consumers daily applied highly radioactive products to their skin, causing chemical burns, permanent dermal lesions, and skin cancer. After centuries plunged into this medical horror, how did humanity finally escape this vicious cycle of deadly treatments? The answer came through a scientific revolution that completely changed our understanding of the human body and diseases. The 19th century brought fundamental discoveries that shattered the foundations of medieval medicine. Louis Pasteur definitively proved the germ theory of disease, revealing that microscopic organisms, not humoral imbalances or malignant vapors, caused infections. Ignaz Semmelweis discovered that simple hand washing drastically reduced hospital mortality, facing furious resistance from doctors who felt offended by the suggestion that their hands could be dirty. Joseph Lister introduced principles of surgical asepsis, using carbolic acid to sterilize instruments and wounds. For the first time in history, surgeries stopped being almost certain death sentences to become procedures with real chances of success. Anesthesia, developed by William Morton and other pioneers, finally freed patients from the indescribable agony of conscious medical procedures. Alexander Fleming accidentally discovered penicillin in 1928, inaugurating the antibiotic era and saving millions of lives that would previously be lost to simple infections. Wilhelm Röntgen discovered X-rays, allowing doctors for the first time to see inside the human body without opening it. Marie and Pierre Curie unraveled the mysteries of radioactivity, establishing the foundations for precise cancer treatments, in stark contrast to the indiscriminate and lethal uses of the past. But the most important change was philosophical. Medicine embraced the scientific method, replacing millennial superstitions with rigorous empirical evidence. Controlled clinical trials became mandatory before approving new treatments. Medical ethics committees were established to protect patients from inhumane experimentation. Medical education was revolutionized, requiring years of anatomical, physiological, and pharmacological study before anyone could practice medicine. As we explore these dark chapters of medical history, one question arises. How could intelligent doctors make such catastrophic mistakes? The answer is simple yet sobering. They lacked the scientific rigor that guides medicine today. Every failed practice of the past, from bloodletting to toxic remedies, paved the way for modern knowledge. Today, antibiotics, anesthesia, and medical imaging stand as triumphs built upon generations of suffering. But the lesson remains. Medicine must stay vigilant, ethical, and evidence-based, for what is seen as innovation today may be judged as error tomorrow. If you enjoyed this journey through the history of medicine, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more fascinating content.